The game SR was playing is a virtual reality MMO game called Tempest. The game has a player count of over 1 million players, and according to him, there has never been a player who cleared an SS rank difficulty dungeon. Until now that's a flex if I ever saw one. SR collapses into a field of grass as exhaustion catches up to him. With a sigh, he says that one shouldn't underestimate the resilience of a NEET. We learn that after SR's parents died in an accident, the shock of the loss made his health take a nosedive, which forced him to resign from work. He started staying indoors and eventually threw himself into playing video games. Before he knew it, he was 30 years old and a complete shut-in. SR tells us that he's been playing the game for 10 years now. He reminisces about how he really did love the game, and yet he had finally defeated the final boss. SR lay on his messy, in-real-life bed that was covered with his trash, at a complete loss of what to do. Back in the game, SR opens his eyes and makes a remark that he hasn't showered in a while. Now that's a fun fact. He sits up and watches as a small notification screen pops up. SR wonders out loud if he had reincarnated. Reincarnating means the player turns into a different character. The notification screen asks him if he wants to reincarnate. However, there's a catch. If one reincarnates, all their current progress will be lost, even his SS rank win. Ouch! SR thinks how much of a waste that would be. But SR continued to think it over. Eventually, with a smile on his lips, he thinks how a gamer would never pass up on the opportunity to reincarnate, and he presses yes on the screen. Immediately, he's swallowed by a gust of light, his clothes tearing from the sudden rush of pressure. As he's sucked into a wild whirlpool of energy, SR admires how everything felt so real. There's another blast of light, and within it, we see a glimpse of a girl. The mysterious girl softly whispers that she's counting on him. However, lost in the light, SR barely has time to think about it before he hears someone yell, announcing his arrival as the Great Hero. When SR opens his eyes, he's lying down in the middle of what appears to be a throne room full of people. SR lies on the floor, completely confused at this sudden turn of events and why he was on the floor in the first place. When he looks up, SR stares blankly at an old man sitting on the throne looking almost just as confused as he was. His eyes are swimming as he thinks about how the room looks eerily like the kingdom of Lindell from Tempest. The old man on the throne, who SR calls King Zeno, even looked so lifelike. Opening his game menu, SR starts to panic as he discovers that he can't find the logout button. The people around him watch him act strangely, awkwardly standing around as they don't know how to respond to his actions. A scholarly man decides to take the initiative and comes closer to SR, welcoming him as he thanks the gods that the great hero was summoned successfully. He doesn't notice SR was steadily getting dizzier on the floor, struggling to hold himself up. Uh-oh. The scholar reaches out to SR's hand to help him up, but to his surprise, SR suddenly pulls on the ends of his robes and in front of everyone in the room, he throws up right then and there. Way to make an impression, champ. The king's mouth hangs open in shock, the palace staff look on in horror, and SR remains unaware as he remains sick to his stomach. In his bedroom, all SR can think of is how the nausea he felt and the smell of his vomit all felt realistic. It really was real. He had reincarnated into the actual world of Tempest. That night, SR is still stuck in bed, still feeling awfully sick. After he threw up right in front of the king, a maid and a knight took pity on him and gave him the room to rest in. SR panics. Considering what he had just done, shouldn't he have been executed? It didn't help that no matter how he looked, the logout button had completely disappeared from the menu. He still couldn't believe that he was reincarnated. SR curses as he notices that in the menu, all that's left is status, inventory, and time. He laments how he's suddenly stuck in the game and how he had things left to do in the real world. But he suddenly stops. He remembers himself just lying down on his old bed, and thinks how there wasn't really anything waiting for him back home. SR gathers his thoughts. He had managed to get into the world of the game he used as a means to escape reality, so shouldn't he be glad? He opens his menu and stares at his stats. Compared to what he had before he reincarnated, the stats menu had changed too. The only important parts were job and level. His thoughts are suddenly cut off when someone knocks at the door. When the door opens, the maid from the throne room and the one who had shown him to his bedroom enters with a tray of water, asking how he was feeling. SR grins awkwardly. He hesitantly asks if he could step down from his position as the hero. Well, that was a fast retirement. The maid questions him. Wasn't he the hero? SR hesitates again before he asks if she wanted to see his job description from his status menu. The maid goes silent at the sight before smiling nervously and asking if SR was serious. Before SR can respond, there's another knock on the door. Without warning, the door opens again and the King of Lindell enters, asking how SR was feeling. SR freezes as the maid greets the king. SR panics. Why was the king in his room and why was everyone calling him the hero? The king looks to him and then blinks. The king suddenly exclaims, realizing that SR is only at level 1 and doesn't even have a job, making it impossible for him to be the hero. SR pauses before agreeing. He really was a shut-in. No job in real life and no job in game. Harsh. A deadly silence takes over the room as the realization sets in. The king looks like his soul was sucked out of him, the shock being too much. With a pause, SR bows his head low and apologizes that he wasn't living up to everyone's expectations. With a heavy sigh, the king says that SR had nothing to apologize for. If anything, they should be the ones apologizing since they dragged him out of his world and he wasn't even the hero. Now it's the king's turn to bow his head low and apologize. A second passes, and the king still doesn't raise his head. SR panics more, feeling that it was so awkward having the literal king bow to him even if he really was the victim. Dino, the scholarly-looking man who was actually a high-profile person in the country, and the man SR threw up on, filled him in on the situation. Apparently, they had attempted to summon a hero from another world using a summoning diamond, something that they only had one of in the whole world. As for why they were desperate for a hero, the princess is deathly sick. According to the palace doctor, she had 1 month left to live. SR wonders if the hero was supposed to be able to heal illnesses. However, what they were really hoping for was that the hero could help get the elixir for them. SR pauses, he turns to the king and repeats his words. The king exclaims, asking if SR had heard of the elixir. SR says he has, but the more he thought about it, he remembers that he had about 100 back when he was still playing the game. It's like that thing where you just stock up on items until the end of the game. SR asks if elixirs were considered valuable in their world. The king suddenly curses and slams his fist on the table, mourning that if only they could clear a B-rank dungeon, then they would have had an elixir by now. SR pauses again, his face almost on the verge of cracking. He thinks of B-rank dungeons, a little confused because as far as he knew, weren't they one of the easiest ones to clear? That almost sounds like a flex. After some time passes, SR knocks on the door of a room. Inside, a beautiful boy and girl welcome him. We find out that the girl is named Lady Phenon. Oh, she looks a bit familiar. At the sight of SR, the young man bids Phenon goodbye, not before calling her older sister. The young man passes by SR without a word, but definitely with a cold shoulder. We find out that the king had asked SR, now known as Suar in this new world, to be the hero, if only just for that day. He wished that Suar would tell the princess that they had successfully summoned the hero, giving her hope. Back to the present, Suar looks uncomfortable as he recounts how Phenon's little brother had stared daggers at him as he passed. Suar, although nervous, kneels in front of the princess, Phenon. He bows his head low and introduces himself, making sure to tell her that he was the hero meant to save her. Suar recounts how he couldn't have said no to the king when he had bowed his head low. But Suar didn't accept because he was the king. No, but because he was a parent who greatly cared for his daughter. In the present, Princess Phenon smiles softly at Suar. She tells Suar that she heard everything from her father, and even tells him not to push himself too much. She's an actual angel. Could she be the mysterious voice from earlier? A pleasant moment passes between them as Suar stares at the sweet smile on her face. And with full confidence, Suar promises to save her. That night, fast footsteps make their way to Phenon's room. The voice isn't even done announcing their arrival before they throw the doors open, asking in a rush how Phenon was feeling. Phenon greets the visitor with joy even when she's bedridden, but her little brother reprimands them for making a racket. Cella, a girl in armor and covered in dirt, immediately apologizes. She's thankful to see that Phenon is okay. Apparently, Cella's messy appearance was caused by her raid in a C-rank dungeon. Although she had reached the 3rd floor, her efforts were still in vain. Phenon remarks that Cella was still doing reckless things and tells her to just leave it to other people. But she refuses and replies that they were running out of time and they needed to clear a B-rank dungeon as soon as possible. Phenon's expression is dark when she asks Cella to at least not go alone when she enters dungeons. Cella flinches when Phenon adds that she would be guilty if anything happened to her. A silence passes between them before Phenon stares blankly at Cella. Phenon tells her to recruit new members in the guild, but Cella admits that no one wants to form a party with her. Apparently, the guild members would seem willing at first, but after being ordered around by Cella, they would always kick her out. Ouch, that's rough, buddy. Phenon internally cries out that Cella wasn't meant for teamwork, but she couldn't tell her that. Eventually, Phenon holds Cella's hands, telling her she was thankful enough for her life updates. With a soft smile, Phenon informs Cella that the king had even successfully summoned a hero to help them. She admits to Cella that she wasn't sure if the summoning was a success, but she wanted to put her trust in Suar. Phenon admits that that was her only hope at that moment, while Cella stares in concern. The following day, Cella is summoned to the guild and she's rather pissed that of all the times to be called in, it was that day. She was as close as sisters with Phenon and she had no time doing any guild work while she needed to be in the dungeons. When she gets inside, Regulus the guildmaster informs her that she was specifically requested by the king. Apparently, he had ordered for her to guard someone. Cella tries to fight for her goal to clear a B-rank dungeon, but Regulus reminds her that she was being ordered by the king. Through gritted teeth, she asks who needs to be guarded. The door opens and in comes Suar, looking rather battle-ragged. Regulus introduces him as the hero that the king summoned. As Cella stares in disbelief, Suar insists that he wasn't the hero because he was only level 1, but Regulus retorts that he was already level 5. Cella suddenly remembers Phenon's words and she snaps out of her thoughts. Cella points to Suar in complete disbelief that someone who looked so average and dull was a hero. Regulus reprimands Cella while Suar listens in with a blank face. They introduce themselves to each other, Cella still unwilling to believe in Suar. Suar suddenly claims that he didn't need a bodyguard, much to Cella's annoyance. She internally remarks that Suar felt like a very selfish person. Completely ignoring her, Suar turns to Regulus and asks about his request for a D-rank adventurer he could have a one-on-one duel with. To both of their surprises, Regulus says that Cella would be his duel partner. Cella is suddenly unsure of having a duel with a hero. Outside the guild grounds, Regulus apologizes to Cella for dragging her into a duel, but Cella brushes it off. Cella was just slightly worried because she was a level 50 swordmaster, and Suar was only at level 5. So what if she accidentally dealt him a deadly injury? Oh, you'd be killed by the king too, for sure. Regulus just shrugs because Suar was so confident he'd win. To add salt to the wound, Suar makes a remark that they should start as soon as possible so they could finish quickly. Suar and Cella enter the battleground, and she asks again if Suar wanted to continue. Because of that, Suar tosses his wooden sword away. With a dark smirk, he mutters that he was going to show off, but Cella misses his words. Replacing his expression with a playful and confident smile, he tells her that he wasn't going to chicken out because Cella didn't look that strong. To add insult to injury, Suar also says that he's confident because Cella couldn't even clear a C-rank dungeon, so it would be a piece of cake for him. Cella's smile cracks, along with her sanity, as Suar continues that he would concede defeat only if she manages to land a single hit on him. Regulus asks shakily from the side what he was doing, but Suar says it's all fine and that he had to give her a handicap or else it wouldn't be a fair fight, unaware of Cella's rising anger. In the next second, Cella slashes down as hard as she could with the wooden sword, but Suar easily leaps aside. With a deadly glare, Cella gets up and says she would end his life in a single strike. Once after another, Cella swings wildly at Suar, but Suar only dodges and weaves with complete ease. A careless smile stuck to his face. Cella was steadily losing patience as she screamed at him to stay in place. As Cella raises her arms for another slash, Suar announces that he was going to take 2 steps back. And true to his word he does, but Cella still completely misses. Cella takes a step back to momentarily retreat while Suar casually says that maybe he could have just stepped back by a step and a half. With a sarcastic smile, he wonders out loud if even D ranks weren't that strong after all, which just raises Cella's infinite levels of anger. 3 minutes later, a man walks towards Regulus as the guildmaster continues to watch the fight. The man asks who Cella is up against. Regulus introduces Suar as a complete newbie, a level 5 who only joined the guild the day before. The man is shocked, especially seeing Cella in a state of complete exhaustion. Cella's thoughts and sight are a mess after tiring herself completely. She couldn't understand why she was losing to a level 5 swordsman and couldn't even land a single hit. Her legs were ready to give out. Ever since she was young, she had been training to protect Phenon, but here comes Suar getting her ass handed to her. With a powerful cry, she rushes at Suar with everything she had, refusing to give up. For a second, everything seems to slow down for Suar. As if time had stopped, Suar ducks and pulls back his arm. With a sharp hit to the neck, Suar takes her sword from her. Damn, he really didn't hold back. Just like in the game, Suar can seemingly read others' movements like a book. A combination of exhaustion, the strong hit, and losing her weapon, Cella is incapable of continuing the fight. Her legs give, but before she can hit the ground, Suar catches her in time. Regulus and the other man watching over them stare in complete shock. Suar swears, suddenly wondering if Cella could get a concussion, unlike in the game. A bit too late to be asking that, you know? Suar apologizes in a rush, while Cella asks in a daze who he really was before passing out. Regulus mutters quietly to himself how he was going to explain things to Dino, as the other man from earlier rushes to an unconscious Cella and a Suar, who couldn't stop apologizing. Going back into the past quite a bit, Suar finds himself visiting the castle town on the same day he met with Princess Phenon. He stares in amazement at the crowded streets. As he walks, he marvels at how different things were now. Compared to the game, the real world of Tempest was in high definition, which shouldn't even be a question since this was real life. Not having any specific plans for going to the city streets, Suar decides to get a license at the Explorers Guild so he could enter dungeons. Finally, he gets to the guild hall. As he enters, Suar is amazed how everything is exactly the same as in the game. Is Tempest based on this world, or is this world based on the game Tempest? Guess we'll never know. Suar walks up to the guild registry and the receptionist hands him a form. Suar reminisces as he signs it, remarking how he had done the same thing the first time he played the game. For a job, he chooses to declare himself a swordsman. However, Suar is stunned. Unlike in the original Tempest, it seemed that first jobs are considered lower jobs, while a second job would be an advanced job. Think of it like a beginner class in a game and then ranking up to the next higher class. Suar stops again as he reads a clause in the form. He points to it and the receptionist asks if he knew the levels of a dungeon. In Tempest, the lowest bar of difficulty is F rank and then E rank, and so goes on. The receptionist explains that once someone raises their level up to level 30 and changes into an advanced job using F rank dungeons, they become eligible to enter E rank dungeons. Suar explodes, unable to believe that lower job explorers could only enter F rank dungeons. The receptionist calmly explains that it was a rule the guild made to keep newly registered explorers from entering dangerous dungeons. Suar realizes with horror that unlike Tempest the game, he wouldn't be able to revive in this world once he died. Well yeah, this is your reality now. One wrong hit and it's over for you. Suar asks the receptionist again if an explorer can change their job to an advanced one once they get to level 30. The receptionist is about to answer when she's cut off. At a nearby table, a girl is screaming. She's arguing with another receptionist, demanding to be allowed to enter a B-rank dungeon. This girl, who we now know as Cella, is of course denied her request because she hasn't even cleared a C-rank dungeon, huh? So this is where Suar learned she hadn't cleared a C-rank dungeon yet. Cella keeps screaming, demanding that they make an exception for her. A young man named Shin, the same one who watched the later part of Cella and Suar's duel, tries to make her calm down, but this almost seems to just make her more upset. Cella asks Shin if he knew a way to convince them to let her go into a B-rank dungeon. We find out that Shin is the leader of the Thunderbolt Trail Party. He tells Cella to stop pushing it, and even if he did take her into his group, she would only prove to be a liability. This enrages Cella even more. She tells Shin that she won't ask for his help anymore and orders him to get lost. Shin sighs. He starts telling her to show a little respect since he was still part of a top party in the country, but Cella just ignores his words and tells him to shut up. Another guild member watching the fight, which is honestly just a one-sided screaming match with Cella, asks another if she was going at it again. Apparently her outbursts were a frequent thing. The guild member remarks that Cella couldn't seem to understand that you had to clear dungeons by order. He continues to say that all Cella did was cause trouble, frequently coming to the guild hall to ask that she skip the C-rank gate and let her into a B-rank gate without bothering proper protocol. Whispers break out around Suar as the guild member mentions that even if Cella was the daughter of a duke, she was going overboard with how much she was abusing her authority. That's quite the scathing review of someone in the same room, sir. Suar seems to be thinking deeply about something. He considers his options. He wanted to get his hands on the elixir as soon as possible, but the only way to do so properly would be to go on an F-rank dungeon clearing marathon and go from there. Suddenly, he remembers a talk with the king. He had apologized once more before handing Suar a dagger with the royal emblem. Apparently, if ever he finds himself in a tight spot, he could show the dagger and most people would be willing to make an exception. In the present, Suar thinks about the power of authority and with a blank face he opens his menu. The receptionist is hoping for the guild master to come soon when Suar disturbs her. Confidently dropping the royal dagger on the table, Suar wears a very smug and triumphant smile. The guild members around him could only stare in disbelief as he says that although he was in a lower job, he would like to request, using his new authority of course, to be led into E and D rank dungeons. 10 minutes later, Suar is set in front of a well-brewed pot of tea, but he's too nervous to drink. Before him is a large man, the guildmaster from before, Regulus. Suar is tense as he makes a comment of how intimidating Regulus was. Regulus apologizes to Suar for being late. Apparently he had to escort an enraged Cella out first. Solemnly, Regulus admits that Dino had already filled him in on what happened and Suar's circumstances. Suar worries for a split second before Regulus tells him that the room was soundproofed. Going back to business, Regulus tells Suar point blank that he couldn't let Suar into D-rank dungeons with how dangerous they were. He continues that Suar was still the country's guest of honor, and should Suar get hurt, much less die in a dungeon, that would be on Regulus. Although Suar understands his circumstances, he's still unable to accept it. Phenon was on a deadline and he needed that elixir fast. Suar raises his head and offers a proposal. If he manages to defeat a person who cleared D-rank dungeons in a one-on-one duel, he wants Regulus to give him access to enter D-rank dungeons. Regulus pauses before admitting that he didn't have all the authority to grant his request and would not be allowed to make the decision on his own. Suar gets up, telling Regulus that of course he understood, and that it was fine because he had something to do anyway. As he starts stretching, Regulus asks him to clarify. With a smile, Suar tells him that there was only one thing he meant. An F-rank dungeon was a dungeon that even lower job explorers could enter. It was the only one of its own, and Suar was going to clear it. Some time passes and we're introduced to a tired-looking girl named Lisa, a receptionist for an F-rank dungeon. She thinks about how her job is rather laid back, only needing to check the licenses of explorers when they want to go into the dungeon. Lisa was a fan of the Thunderbolt Trail, the party Shin handled, and the country's greatest party. Because of that, she had taken up a receptionist position. However, the guild only handled F-rank dungeons which were beginner-friendly, so she had yet to meet any of the Thunderbolt members. Just as she remarks how bored she was, someone steps into the room. Looking quite awkward, Suar walks in. He asks Lisa if it would be alright to enter the dungeon given how late it was. Entering receptionist mode, she lets him know that the dungeon would close at 10 p.m. and asks if it's his first time going into one. Suar answers yes, however he adds that it's his first time in this world. Lisa is obviously confused but carries on anyway and comes to the conclusion that he was a beginner. Lisa guides him to a teleportation circle and Suar follows. Stepping into the circle, a gust of strong wind envelops him. Before he could completely teleport, Lisa reminds him in a rush that should he be in trouble, he should use forced return. Suar merely smiles at her, telling her not to worry and thanking her for working hard at night. And then he was off. Suar disappears with a flash. There's a pause before Lisa frowns. She remarks how Suar was strange, wondering why he was more worried about her when he should be worried about himself. Time passes and it's 10 p.m. Lisa is sweeping the dungeon when she mutters how it was time for her to clock out. More time passes and it was 11 p.m. Lisa, carrying a stack of files, watches the teleportation circle for any sign of Suar, but he still isn't back. Eventually 2 a.m. hits and Lisa is truly panicking, wondering if Suar had actually died in the dungeon. Lisa is a mix of annoyance and worry as she thinks how Suar had made her worried sick from the very start. She complains in her head that although it was an F-rank dungeon, Suar had looked far too skinny. He had even completely ignored her warnings. Lisa pauses in her rant. Calming down, she turns to the teleportation stone and bows in prayer, wishing Suar's soul safe passage into the afterlife. At least she has it right that you should show respect to the dead, I guess. Just as she turns around to leave, a sudden burst of wind and energy explodes behind her as Suar appears from the teleportation circle, happy with his progress. Lisa turns around in a combination of surprise and horror. Confirming that he was indeed the rookie from earlier, Lisa lets it slip that he was alive. A silence passes through them for a second before Suar points to himself and asks her if she thought he had died. Lisa awkwardly answers that yes, she really did think he was gone. Recovering from her initial shock, she steadies herself as she tells him she's glad he had used forced return in time. She was about to reprimand him for going into dungeons alone when Suar cuts her off, informing her that he'd cleared the dungeon. Lisa stares at him blankly. With a proud grin, Suar tells her that he had cleared all 5 floors and all 5 bosses of each floor. With a sudden jump from level 1 to level 5, Suar had successfully cleared an F-rank dungeon on his own. Back in the present, after his duel with Cella, the girl glares daggers at Suar, a bandage under her chin where Suar had hit her. He stares back with a mixture of unease and fear, a wavering smile on his lips. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, Suar makes an attempt to ask about her condition and tries to sincerely apologize, but Cella completely cuts him off and tells him to keep walking. Suar looks away, cold sweat covering his face in his terror as Cella continues to seethe behind him. That glare could actually kill a man, I don't blame him. Suar recounts how the day before he had gotten under her skin and beat her up. He had thrown countless disses and jabs at her, but Suar admits to himself that he had no choice to use those tactics because it wouldn't have felt like a true victory to him if he won against Cella by normal means. Suar knows that a level 5 swordsman like him wouldn't have dealt much damage if he chose to attack head-on. If he did, he would have had to attack her over and over to deal actual damage enough to chip at her defenses. That's why he had to resort to saying that he would concede defeat with only 1 hit from her. That's a good tactic, actually. Very sly, but also really good. What made him so confident that he would last 5 minutes? Apparently a certain skill from Tempest had made its way to this world with him. Suar had certain eyes he had cultivated over time, ones that could read a person's movements. In this world, he could even use them in dungeons without a problem. He turns back to Cella and thinks how, despite having his eyes, Cella's sword skills weren't half bad. Although he didn't know what was considered proper swordsmanship in this world, judging from the way she had moved, her body movement was good, or to be more specific, she had the basics down well. However, watching Cella recover in bed, Suar wished he could have enjoyed the duel a bit more. He just didn't expect her to get knocked out from his hit and the exhaustion. Of course she would have. She was the only one attacking for a good few minutes. After the duel, Regulus and Suar talk outside Cella's room. Suar reasons that because of the duel, surely Cella's role as his bodyguard would be called off, right? However, Regulus grabs Suar by the shoulders and tells him that that won't do, and Suar should consider the position he was in, much to Suar's confusion. Regulus explains that Cella is Phenon's childhood friend and that she wasn't allowed into the dungeons unless the king orders her to guard someone. Regulus asks Suar to help Cella. Suar purses his lips, face blank as he thought about it. In exchange for his troubles, Regulus had asked Dino for permission to allow Suar to enter dungeons above E rank despite having a lower job. All he had to do was show a card to the receptionist. Suar remains quiet, still blank-faced with pursed lips. before Regulus tells him to quit complaining. Back to the present, Suar and Cella walk the kingdom streets, Cella still actively glaring at him as she follows close behind. Suar is glad that he's free to do things by himself without having someone keeping tabs on him, but the fact that he can turn down the guard offer was the best addition out of all of them. Cella was continuously putting pressure on him from behind, and because he's never been with a girl like that, not to mention he was a complete NEET who never left his house, he didn't have any idea how to act. Finally turning around, Suar bows low. He politely tells her that they should go, and again he sincerely apologizes to her. A complicated look passes through her face. Cella pauses before she tells him that he was wrong, much to Suar's confusion. With a blushing face, Cella turns away, declaring that she was the official winner in their duel. Ayo. Suar stares blankly, unsure how to react. Yeah, that's the proper response to that. After a pause, Suar asks if she was serious, and Cella yells that during their duel, she had landed a hit before she lost consciousness, making Suar be more confused. Her face turning completely red as she grits her teeth, Cella claims that it was during his chin attack, when her chin had made contact with his hand. Suar just plainly replies, unsure how to respond to that other than repeating chin attack. Cella yells again that she was the true victor in the duel. Suar ends up agreeing with her like he was pacifying a child. Eventually, Suar boldly tells Cella that she was a bit of an idiot with a sore loser side to her. His words, not mine. Cella walks ahead, saying she was never going to talk to him anymore, while Suar follows behind, continuously apologizing. And with that, Suar's dungeon-clearing days began. Suar and Cella gaze at a building in the distance. It seemed like ruins lit by a strange light. There they stood in front of an E-rank dungeon. Suar turns and lets Cella know that he was going in, and that he should be able to clear the dungeon within 2 hours. Cella raises an eyebrow at him, telling him that surely he didn't think she was staying behind. Suar is even more surprised and tries to reason with her because apparently when 2 people enter a dungeon together, the experience gets split in half. But Cella retorts that she was still his bodyguard, so obviously she had to come along with him. Wanting to reason with her again, Suar is stopped short by Cella's smile, which was a contrast to the horrifying aura she was giving. She asks if there was any problem with her following him, and if he hated her hovering around him. Sweating bullets, Suar tells her that of course he was fine with it. Having settled things, more like not really having another choice, Suar turns and consoles himself, saying that maybe it wouldn't be too bad if it was only a one-time thing. As they get inside, a pair of beautiful twins greet them with smiles. They're the dungeon receptionists. Already kept up to speed by Regulus, they lead Suar and Cella to the teleportation circle. Suar blushes as he remarks that even there he's still being called the hero. They step on the teleportation circle. As the wind rushes around them, Suar remains quiet and focused, but Cella reveals another one of her goals for joining him. She wanted to get a good idea on how Suar fights and figure out the secret to his strength by watching him fight in the front lines. A flash of light swallows them and they're dropped into the ground. Before them was what appeared to be a desert wasteland, completely filled with sand. They had entered the E-rank dungeon's first floor. Without thinking much about it, Suar makes an offhand comment that it still looked the same as it did, even thinking about how it was always midday in that part of the dungeon. But Cella catches his words, and with a terrifying look on her face, at this point she just looks scary all the time. Cella repeats his words back to him. Suar freezes, remembering that this was supposed to look like his first time in an E-rank dungeon, and comes up with the excuse that what he really meant was that the first floor did look as how other people had told him, nice catch. Suar tells us that in Tempest, the main highlight of the game was, of course, dungeon exploration. Dungeons generally consisted of 5 floors. You just needed to fight with and defeat the dungeon boss, and you would have successfully cleared the dungeon. Tens of enemies can be found on each floor. When you defeat them all, you're allowed entrance to the next floor. In this new world, there are dungeons from A rank to F rank, beginners starting off with F rank and slowly leveling up over time. E rank, just like the one dungeon he cleared the other day, was a step above F rank. Suar turns back to Cella with a wavering smile and tells her that he was off to clear the dungeon, while Cella just shoots him a look and shoos him away, telling him to go already. Suar walks ahead, thinking about how awkward things were between them. However, he doesn't think too much about it. He closes his eyes and raises his sword, beginning to focus. When he opens them back up, an otherworldly focused aura comes from him, specifically his eyes. Cella flinches at the sight of it. Whenever Suar entered dungeons, it always felt like his body was made fully aware of his surroundings, and all his other senses were made sharper. His field of vision broadens. He raises his sword and gets into a battle position as he notices something emerging from the sand. Something they called a scorpion-type red crow. Cella notices it too, and thinks that although it's not that strong, it can easily escape by jumping. She's ruminating how even its tail's attacks are trouble when she's cut off. Suar rushes forward, and just as the scorpion leaps to the air, he delivers one devastating blow right in front of Cella. She's stunned as Suar's sword stops far too close to her face. Suar suddenly notices his mistake and asks if he had accidentally hit her, but she brushes him off and just complains that the scorpion's debris fell on her. He apologizes as he was used to doing things solo, and again, she just tells him to carry on. Suar goes back to fighting, letting Cella know that he'll finish things up as quickly as possible. Cella watches on, measuring Suar's skills. She observes that his swordsmanship and stamina were rather basic, including his speed. But it's not the same with his accuracy, which she found surprisingly high. She comes to the conclusion that he had really great eyes. His ability to read his opponent's movements were abnormal. Not only that, but because he can dodge his opponent's attacks with as minimal movement as possible, he didn't have to spend too much energy. Cella frowns, never having seen someone use the same fighting style. As she continues to watch Suar fight, she internally wonders what kind of world did he used to live in. Oh girl, if you only knew how he got his skills. With a relieved sigh, Suar wiped out the whole floor. He turns to Cella and tells her that he was moving on to the next floor. Although he knew it might have been a hassle, he asks her to carry the loot and she agrees. Suar presses the option to keep moving in the menu. As they're sent to the next floor, Cella is holding onto Suar's back to stabilize herself from the transport. Suar apologizes to her for taking too long in clearing the dungeon because of his low level. Cella brushes it off and tells him she didn't mind. Suar goes quiet for a while before slowly bringing up the fact that she was the childhood friend of Princess Phenon. Cella gets a mixed expression of horror and shock as Suar keeps going. He reveals that Regulus had told him that for the sake of saving Phenon, Cella wanted to find an elixir. Cella grits her teeth before hesitantly agreeing. She tells him that she was being pressed for time, especially how she needed to clear a B-rank dungeon as soon as possible. Suar realizes that that was why she's been in the guild for the past few days. Cella takes offense to this, thinking it was a jab at her. Finally, Suar says that what he was trying to say was that she had the option to leave it all to him. Oh no bro, that does not sound as nice as you think it does. Cella stares at him blankly. That look is honestly more terrifying than her glares. Suar stares back, rather confused at her reaction. Cella lets go of Suar and asks what he meant. Was he trying to say that it was an impossible mission for her? Someone who lost to a level 5 swordsman like Suar. Suar finally backtracks and tries to salvage things. He tries to explain that that wasn't what he meant at all. However, Cella keeps going and asks him if Suar thought that she was better off tending to his needs since she's not strong enough to be his bodyguard. Suar realizes too late, far too late, that he had said the wrong thing. Well, not really the wrong thing. More of that, you worded it in the most awful way possible. He continues to try and save the conversation and explain himself, telling her that he figured he should help her if she was exploring the dungeons while suffering and that it was the only ability he had to offer. You're just digging your grave at this point. Cella gets a dark look in her eyes as she cuts him off, telling him to go ahead and take care of the monsters instead of talking. Yikes. Suar flinches in horror as he realizes she was shutting him down. As he tears into the monsters on the second floor, Suar is internally crying at the idea of how introverts were bound to screw up if they tried to engage in banter with others. He even feels like he never grew up at all. With those social skills, it's believable. An hour later, Suar is covered in sweat and breathing hard. Cella makes a comment that he'd just finished the 5th floor, and rather quickly at that. Suar admits through tired breathing that he was hurrying up. Suar looks flushed, but he's happy that he's close to reaching level 10. Back in Tempest, level 10 was around the time where his status would change. Supposedly, his endurance should level up as well. Cella asks him if he was going to fight the boss, and Suar confirms he was going to. Cella suddenly exclaims that he was being ridiculous and asks for his current level. Suar admits that he was already level 9. As Cella yells in disbelief that he was already in level 9, Suar presses the button that sends them to the boss room. Suar now stands before the E-rank dungeon's boss, the Flame Gazelle, a majestic creature twice as big as him with large antlers. Cella shouts for Suar to be careful, warning him that one hit into his vital points and he would die. She adds that she was using forced return should anything go wrong. Suar rushes into battle. Cella shouts that the gazelle was charging in, but Suar was ahead of her. He leaps into the air and flips overhead the gazelle's many antlers. He slashes once at the gazelle's head before dropping back down into solid ground. Suar strategizes that between the gazelle's horns, the specific opening above them was the perfect place to hit its weak spot. Rushing back in and slashing again, he plans to keep on aiming for that specific spot, leaving no room for error until he wears it down. Over and over again without missing a beat, he went after the gazelle and slashed it in the same spot each time. First it was single digits, then double until he reached 57 slashes. Hitting it in the same spot repeatedly 57 times is crazy work, given how hard it is to hit the head. Suar takes a few steps back to gather himself. Taking into account the enemy's HP and Suar's current level, he should only need to make one more strike and he would be able to take it out. He just needed to wait for the perfect moment. The gazelle lowers its head to charge, and with full force, Suar rushes in to meet it. Cella watches as with a wild swing of his sword, Suar cuts the flame gazelle's head clean off its body. A notification screen pops up in front of Suar, announcing he had reached level 10. Internally, he celebrates that his stats should have leveled up too. Filled with joyous adrenaline, he bounds to Cella, apologizing to her for taking too long. He holds up his hands in apology and tells her it's time for them to head back. He remembers that it should be around noon when they get back, so he invites her to get lunch. A tense silence passes by them as Cella remains quiet. Awkwardly, Suar tries to say more as he breaks into a cold sweat at her continued silence. Grinding her teeth and glaring daggers at him, Cella tells him to eat lunch by himself for all she cares. And finally, Cella tells Suar that she hates him. I mean, we knew that before, but that still hurts. Suar is hit by the full force of her words, internally thinking how if he was still in Japan, it would have left him holing up inside his house. He turns around downcast, trying to leave first, but Cella calls out his name, a dark look on her face. Suar hesitantly answers, and Cella asks him who taught him how to fight. Suar stumbles over his words as he admits that he learned on his own. Cella yells in disbelief. She repeats again, steadily losing patience if he really did learn on his own, and demands to know how long he's been teaching himself how to fight. Suar is confused, not sure where these questions were coming from, when he answers that he's been learning for around 10 years. Cella, absolutely pissed, tells him that she's been learning and tirelessly practicing with her swordplay every day for 20 years. Unsure how to respond, even wondering if she was just trying to flex how better she was because of how long she's been training, Suar just responds meekly that he thinks she's impressive. Truly, the lack of social cues is the downfall of an introvert. Cella, of course, doesn't take his words nicely. She tells him how she was starting to wonder if she was already reaching the limits of her abilities, but she doubts Suar would ever understand. Cella says that Suar, someone who was naturally born with talent, would never understand her problems. A blank but dark look comes over Suar's face. Slowly, he tells her that he wasn't born talented. Cella immediately cuts in, asking that if he really wasn't talented, then what was she supposed to call his skills? Suar grows quiet. Internally, Suar thinks of how for the past 10 years, he had continuously gone into dungeons in Tempest without getting sick of it. After getting sick of coworkers that exploited him and the death of his parents, he kept going into more dungeons to get his mind off of all the pain he was experiencing. He worked tirelessly to find a playstyle that would fit him, and now that Cella wanted to call his playstyle, something that he only found after dying over and over again, 10,000s of times as talent, it didn't sit right with Suar. He tells her that if he wanted to call the sharpness of his eyes talent, then, in a sense, she was correct. But if Cella was going to say that all his other fonts talent, and if she was the type of person to chalk up all of the things Suar had learned over the years as talent, Cella flinches as Suar looks at her darkly and with contempt. He tells her that because that was what she thought, then he hated her too. That had no business being so terrifying. Suar ruminates how badly things had gone. He knew that of course Cella wouldn't have understood his circumstances, and yet he ended up getting mad at her anyway. Suar gets angry at himself as he reminds himself that all his progress was just from a game, something not all that completely real. And yet he did take it seriously, and he still worked hard playing Tempest. As they go back to the E-rank dungeon entrance, one of the receptionist twins greets them warmly, only to notice how dejected they looked. Both Suar and Cella have the same hurt and aggravated expressions on their faces. Internally, Suar thinks how he never had to experience things like his current problem when he played Tempest by himself and tells himself that surely he really was only meant to play solo. Cella remains quiet as they leave, her cheeks puffed in indignation. Suar, despite achieving level 10 and clearing an E-rank dungeon, can only let out a tired sigh as they exit the dungeon. Morning arrives and Cella is lying down in her bed. In complete silence, she sits up in bed and makes her way to the mirror, changing into her usual gear. A familiar scene comes to mind, and Suar's voice is clear in her head. The moment he had told her that if she was the type of person to chalk up all his skills as talent, then he hated her too. Cella's face flushes in discomfort and she slams a hand on the mirror. She grits her teeth as she asks herself why she was the one feeling hurt, and if anything, she shouldn't even care about what Suar said. Later on in the day, Suar is stuck in a daze. He stands in front of a food stall and orders a sandwich. He's thinking how it's been 3 days since his argument with Cella. Whenever their eyes met in town, she would immediately turn around and look away. Suar hadn't said a single word to her since then too. Just 3 days back, he had managed to clear a D-rank dungeon after finishing an E-rank one, but Cella didn't come with him all the way into the dungeon. If anything, once he told her he was moving forward, she had simply acknowledged his words and continued to train on her own. To summarize what happened in the dungeon, Suar had to fight in the biting cold of a mountain in the middle of a harsh blizzard. He explored the D-rank dungeon for 3 days and got his swordsmanship skill level all the way up to 30. Around the same time, he also gained a new skill that seemed fit for a game, presence detection. It was a passive skill unlocked at level 25. As the name implies, it lets someone roughly sense the location of foreign objects and is just the perfect and handy ability for speeding through dungeons. In the present, Suar takes a bite of his sandwich and ponders that since he was at level 30, it might be time for him to change classes. Suar meets up with Cella and lets her know his plans, which Cella does not take well, at all. She almost immediately explodes after hearing his idea. She asks why he wasn't going to try and promote to an advanced class. Cella tells him that if he switches to a new class, he'll have to start leveling again from scratch. She yells at him one final time, asking him what in the world he was even thinking. Suar could only reply with a silent, awkward smile. Finally, his expression breaks into a dumb smile as he nervously responds that Cella was right. Cella calls him an idiot again just to really dig it in, and tells him not to do it because it would be a total waste. Internally, Suar grumbles to himself that he knew things would end up like that, even asking himself why he thought he should explain. Cella continues to glare at him again. Her face seems to call him an idiot without using any words. Suar starts to think how the biggest difference between his current world and the game he played was how little information the status screen gave someone. When he used to play the game, his status screen used to have complete information, from class and level to listing down strength, vitality, agility, dexterity, intelligence, and mind. Status values were detailed to go from A being the lowest and G being the highest. His past status values are quite the flex. However, in the current world, all Suar could see on the screen was class, level, and current skills, the main problem being that it didn't show status values. In the game, even after changing classes, the stats you gained at level 30 were kept, but as Cella explained, the concept of changing jobs doesn't seem to work the same way. That was why it was necessary to level up all 5 base classes. Suar frowned as he thought about how if the current world works like the game, then he should be able to clear the first tier jobs one by one. It was still unclear to him whether knowledge from the game worked in the new world or not, but if it did, their whole world could be flipped upside down. He reminds himself that if he's not careful, he might accidentally expose everything. After a pause, he realizes he was still in a conversation with Cella. When he turns back to her, he has a very odd and shining expression, sort of like the 70s anime art style El Mao, and asks her if she was calling his decisions mood shifts. Rather bothered by the expression on his face, Cella yells at him again. Suar continues to tease her by saying she was acting like Suar got tired of being a swordsman. Cella yelled at him that she couldn't understand him. She angrily exclaims that Suar had just changed classes because he was bored. He reached the level needed to clear D-rank dungeons and basically wanted to throw it away. Suddenly she gets a judgmental look in her eyes as she mocks him for being too overly confident and tells him that that was why she couldn't stand guys like him. Suar stays quiet with just a silly blank smile on his face. Cella asks him what he wanted to say, but he stays quiet except for an odd sound and the same silly smile. Finally, she shouts that anyone who charges into a sandworm with a grin like the one Suar had on was definitely not normal. Suar thinks of himself doing just that and comes to the conclusion that her words were rather harsh. After some time, Cella hands him a glowing orb that was used to change into a lower tier class. Cella crosses her arms and confirms for the last time that he wasn't aiming for a promotion to a high-tier class like Swordmaster, but instead wanted to change jobs to the low-tier class fighter. Suar agrees. With Cella giving him the instructions on how to use the orb, Suar closes the orb around his fist and yells to reclass into a fighter. There's a flash of bright light and the orb crumbles in his palm. He calls out his status screen and it appears right in front of him. Breathing out a sigh of relief, he's glad that the job change worked, his class now saying fighter. He excitedly starts running, ready to hit another dungeon. Cella stops him and asks him if he was okay. She lets him know that heading into a dungeon right after changing jobs was reckless. Suar reassures her that he was going to be fine. He apologizes for keeping her waiting and encourages the both of them to do their best. With a frustrated look on her face, and we can see a bit of a blush there too, Cella asks him that if anything happens, he should let her know. Suar freezes for a minute, a wide-eyed smile on his face. He says goodbye one more time. Internally, he observes that Cella had seemed to have mellowed out a bit and wonders if it was because of their argument just then. In a dungeon, Suar leaps into the air. A resounding boom echoes as he throws down his fist. A large polar bear-like creature takes the hit at full blast and falls as Suar drops to the ground in a perfect landing. The polar bear's remains start to disappear in a shower of pixels. Suar says his current conditions were good and even his strength had gone up. But he's interrupted in his thinking by a sudden sneeze. Shivering, he comments on the cold weather. He trudges through the winter landscape, mumbling to himself that like in the original game, temperature changes were common in his current world's dungeons. He's considering buying himself a jacket when two wobbling forms catch his eyes. With a turn of his foot, he charges right at the new enemies, dealing a powerful blow. But it's not quite enough to kill. Suar throws multiple punches at the creature. Rather pissed at his actions, the creature throws a powerful hit of its own. Suar tries to hold down his position and guards the incoming attack. He takes it, but even at level 3 the creature was able to hit harder than Suar expected. He takes a moment to drink a healing potion and groans how he couldn't even land a clean critical hit because of the snowy terrain. Even with his current circumstances, he wipes his mouth with a smile. He still liked this kind of challenge. Suar gets into a fighting stance, ready to test out more of his underdog build that he loved. Just like in the game, if someone raises a secondary base class to level 30, it's confirmed that they can transfer into advanced secondary classes. That could only mean that if leveling both swordsman and fighter to 30 lets you become a weapon master, then it only makes sense that there should be specialized advanced classes too. Suar and the monster rush at each other again. With one more powerful hit, Suar punches through the creature, which explodes into handfuls of snow blocks. Internally, Suar prays that the system better work the same way in his current world too. It had to. Some time passes until it's the following day. A tired but accomplished Suar finally reaches level 30 fighter. Cella exclaims in disbelief as she hears that Suar asked for another job change. This time he wanted to be a priest. She comments that it didn't suit him at all, considering this guy has been slashing and punching everything on sight for the past few chapters. I have to agree with her. Cella was in the middle of doing push-ups as she continued to question Suar, who only acknowledges that everything she said is true, even when she asks if he was only doing it because he was bored again. She relents anyway, and Suar reclasses. Suar was planning to level all his stats equally, and the priest class would help boost his mind stat. As Cella continued to train, so did Suar. He came up to her while she was doing squats and told her he was becoming an archer, and later on while she was doing mountain climbing exercises, he told her he was going to be a knight. Eventually, 7 days later. Swordsman, fighter, priest, archer, and finally, knight was up to level 30 as well. Suar coughs out blood in front of Cella. Disgusted, Cella hands him a handkerchief, which he accepts gratefully. After giving Suar a moment to wipe his mouth, Cella finally opens the conversation. She asks him what he was really trying to achieve, and if there was a specific reason behind all his job changing. Suar blanks. Internally, he thinks of how Cella really wanted to get that elixir for Princess Phenon. Suar pauses in answering. He thinks of how if Cella finds out what he'd been hiding, she would charge into that dungeon and get herself killed. Cella calls out to him and snaps him out of his thoughts. Suddenly, Suar sits up straight and asks Cella to promise him that she would believe in him. Cella is dumbfounded, but she doesn't even get time to respond before Suar keeps on going. Second, he wanted her to promise she won't turn her back on him. And third, he wanted her to promise that she won't do anything dangerous. Suar holds up 3 fingers and says that if she could promise him those 3 things, he would teach Cella how to become stronger. Cella is speechless. Yeah, what do you even say when a guy you've known for a little more than a week tells you to never backstab him? Her fists clench over her lap, but eventually she tells him that she would think about it. With a rather empty expression on her face, she informs him that as of that moment, her 10-day escort mission was over. She asks him if he was heading back to the dungeons the next day. Suar answers that he was going to try and go for a C-rank dungeon. Suar freezes as Cella says that if it was him, he would surely breeze through the dungeon. With a nervous and wobbly smile, Suar stammers that he wasn't that strong, but Cella scoffs and tells him that there was no need to belittle himself. Standing up from the table, Cella throws him a soft smile before saying that they should meet again on another day. Suar's eyes are wide in shock. As she walks away, Suar wonders if he saw it right that she had smiled. He takes a nervous sip of his drink, thinking that maybe the problem was finally solved. And yet, for the first time since coming to that world, he felt like he truly was alone. Time passes and it's the following day. Suar is panicking as he yells to himself that surely he could switch to a subclass. A subclass evolution was something completely unheard of in his current world. First, swordsman and then fighter. The subclass it evolves into should be sword fighter. Sitting on his bed with his hands clasped together, he yells to reclass again one more time. And again, he's surrounded by blinding light. He's thrown back by a pulse of energy and lands on the bed. The effect freaked him out for a second. He raises a shaking finger as he worriedly wonders if it was a success or a failure. He opens his status screen. With wide eyes, he reads that as of right now, his class was Sword Fighter at level 1 with presence detection and prediction skills. He had gained presence detection as a swordsman and prediction as a fighter. He throws a fist up in celebration and yells in triumph. With his current abilities, he had a better chance in clearing a B-rank dungeon. Excitedly, he decided that it was time to test if he could really fight with his current skills. Doing a quick recap of his current time in the new world, Princess Phenon only had 1 month left to live during the moment he first arrived. He was already short on time. He did things at the same speed he used in the game, so Suar thought things should work out. He makes up his mind. He throws the door of his room open. He only had 20 days left for the princess, but it was fine since he knew he was going to make it. But the moment he took a step outside, his legs faltered and started giving out. He paused before turning around. Guessing he didn't get enough sleep and wondering if the current world had any coffee, he basically speedran 150 levels in 10 days. I'd be more surprised if he wasn't tired in the slightest. A soft voice recalls that they loved stories from faraway lands. A dragon living deep in the mountains, a legendary mage living alone by the edge of a swamp, or the chamber of time where the god who made the world resides. But among them all, there was one story that captured their heart the most. A young girl with short hair and a familiar getup tilts her head to the side. She asks another child if her name was truly Phenon and if it was true that she's never left the castle before. Phenon, as a child, frowned at the girl with tired eyes. Hesitantly, she answers that both statements were true. Immediately, the other girl asks how come she's never left. Phenon simply replies that a body was rather weak. This was the first time Phenon and Cella met. Phenon was 5 and Cella was 11. The first time they met, all Phenon could think of was how much of a blunt brat Cella was. As they sit on a bench in the castle gardens, Cella asks Phenon if she ever wanted to go outside. Phenon quietly answers that of course she does, but her father the king insists that she wasn't allowed to. Cella thinks about things for a bit before leaning closer to Phenon's ear with a playful grin. She tells the princess that there was a super popular cake shop in the town at that moment, and she invites her to sneak out with her. Excitedly, Phenon turns to her and tells her that she wanted to go. Cella and Phenon run through the castle corridors, running away as the castle doctor tries to catch up to them. Back then, Phenon didn't know that Cella was actually a girl. To her, Cella was already her prince. Even in the present, Phenon still thought of her that way, although just a little bit. A little while after their trip outside, Dino was reprimanding Cella, telling her not to repeat her mistake. Because Cella forced Phenon to go out, the princess caught a fever. He tells her that if she kept acting up, Cella wouldn't be allowed back into the palace. Weeping softly, Cella apologizes, reasoning that she just wanted the princess to see what was outside the walls. Dino yells that the way she was doing things was wrong. He's cut off when Phenon calls out to him and she struggles to sit up in bed. Phenon apologizes to him and defends Cella, telling Dino that it was all her fault because she was the one who told Cella she wanted to leave. Caught between two children crying and apologizing, now you really gone and did it. Come on man, they're just kids. Dino eventually lets out a heavy sigh. He turns back to Cella, who was still crying, and asks if she really did accompany her brother into the dungeons. Dino kneels down so he's at eye level with Cella. What happened in the dungeons, the people she met in town, and everything else, Dino asks Cella to tell all of it to Phenon. Bringing her outside wasn't the only way for her to know the world out of the castle. Cella listens with a dazed but hopeful look as Dino tells her that when the day comes that Phenon gets well and is able to go outside, all of the stories Cella told her will mean something. Cella turns to Phenon as Dino asks the princess what she thought of their new arrangement. There's a pause before Phenon gives a wobbly smile and agrees. With tears still in her eyes, Cella declares that she would tell Phenon everything, as long as Phenon got better. Phenon cries and Cella hugs her as she promises to do her best. Starting from that day by day, Cella would come visit Phenon's bedroom and recount everything that took place in the dungeon. One time, a battered and dirtied Cella sat in front of Phenon with a crude drawing on a piece of paper. According to Cella, it was a glowing transparent slime that she saw in the dungeon. Despite looking cute, she wasn't allowed to take it out. Phenon makes a small comment that she wanted to see it for herself. Cella continues that it was always daytime inside the dungeon, and if she goes at night, she ends up not sleeping well, which Phenon thought was weird. Another time, Cella came bursting into her room, letting Phenon know that she had defeated a monster for the first time. Phenon shared her excitement, but Cella continued that she had sent the dropped core in for processing and asked them to turn it into a pair of earrings. Phenon comments that she found them lovely. Holding her hands, Cella tells Phenon that she wanted to keep wearing them so she never forgot her original purpose. She had another pair made so Phenon could wear the other earring. Phenon hesitates, asking Cella if she was sure. The other girl replies that it was just a magic stone anyone could find in any F-rank dungeon and how it was really cheap. But Cella continues that she hoped one day Phenon could come with her to a dungeon. With a bright smile, Cella says that she noticed that out of everything Cella had told Phenon, her favorites were mostly the dungeon stories. She adds that she hoped that Phenon's heart could grow closer to the dungeon. Phenon wore her pair of earrings with hopeful glittering eyes as she thanked Cella for her gift. However, after that, Phenon gradually began to feel the strain on her body and she could tell Cella was pushing herself too. Eventually, Phenon fell ill completely. A lot of people entered the dungeon, but none managed to obtain the elixir. Lately, Phenon was awake for shorter and shorter periods of time. She was sure she didn't have much time left. She only had one wish: she wanted to go to a dungeon. One day, another adventurer arrived and introduced himself to her. He said he was the hero and he promised to save her. It was Suar. Phenon blinked. Internally, she knew he wasn't lying. He wasn't the first to promise that. There were others before him. However, they were seeking rewards of fame or calculating how to become her husband and gain status. But Finon smiled. She could tell with Suar. He was someone who was fascinated by dungeons. When she looked at him, she remembered the first time she met Cella, and the person she used to be. Finon wasn't quite sure why, but she could simply feel like he would take her out of that place. In the present, at the castle, Cella walked over to Finon in her makeshift bed in the gardens. Immediately, she asks if it was alright for Finon to be outside. The princess responds that she was feeling better that day. Cella apologizes to her since it's been a while since she last visited her. Finon smiles at her warmly and tells her not to worry. She tells Cella that since she's been accompanying the hero this entire time, she would really like to hear her story. Internally, Cella observes that Finon was skinnier than before, but out loud, Cella comments that Finon must have been curious about their adventures. Finon excitedly claps her hands together and says that he may be her prince, but to Finon, he was also a hero. So of course she wanted to hear everything about the two of them. Her excitement leaves her in a coughing fit, but Finon replies that it always happens to her, so she's fine. She brushes off Cella's worry and pushes her to continue with the discussion. Time passes as Cella recounts her story with Suar for the past 10 days. Finon resolutely clenches her fists and says that since Suar was out there fighting every day, she had to do her best too. Cella gets a dark look on her face. Internally, she thinks of how Finon was sharp. The princess figured out long ago that the one she's relying on isn't a hero at all. I honestly want to know how she figured out that he wasn't the hero. Gut feeling vibes? And yet Finon still chose to believe in Suar. Cella knew that deep down Finon wanted to believe that someone was out there who could save her. Cella is snapped out of her thoughts when Finon speaks again. The princess asks if Cella was unsure whether she should fully trust in Suar or not. Cella hesitates and apologizes, admitting that she wasn't sure. But if there was one thing that Cella knew, it was that Suar was strong. Strong enough to make her wonder if all her hard work had been for nothing. But Finon smiles warmly at Cella and tells her that from what Cella had told her, she understood that Suar was just like her. Both of them were someone who's been working hard all this time. Cella blinks and thinks about her words, but she remembers her argument with Suar when he said he hated her too. Before she could say anything more, Finon leans closer to her and says she was going to tell her a secret. Apparently, the first time she talked to Suar, she noticed he was trying to act tough, which caught Cella off guard. Finon continues that she didn't think it was ever easy for him. Clearing B-rank dungeons takes real effort, and Finon thought that it was the same for Suar. Finon smiled serenely at Cella. The princess tells her that that was why Cella has to support the hero. Finally, Finon's brother told her it was time for her to head back to her room. With one more smile, Finon asks for her to support Suar and waves goodbye. Cella is left to her thoughts in the castle gardens. Later on, in the kingdom town, Suar lets out a yawn. He was completely tired and his level hadn't gone up since the other day. Sleep deprivation was straight up killing him. Apparently, the water in the dungeon was a total mess. It threw him off when his shoes got soaked. But more importantly, he thinks of that conversation he had with Cella and how he told her that he'd help her get stronger as long as she trusted him. Suar crumples into himself at the memory, scolding himself for saying something that sounded too much like a love confession. He mourns how he's never done that kind of thing before. It wasn't love confession levels, but for complete strangers, I have to agree that it was a bit too much for knowing each other for 10 days Almao. When he looks up, there Cella stood in all her blushing glory. Suar tries to be casual and ask her what she was doing out in town so early in the day, wondering if maybe she was going to the guild before he's cut off. Cella suddenly throws herself down into a respectful bow and asks to be forgiven. There's a heavy pause between them before Suar breaks into a cold sweat. He hesitantly reaches out and asks her what she was apologizing for. Cella tells him it was for calling everything he worked hard for simply talent. Finally, Cella tells Suar that she believed in him and that was why she was asking him to let her stay by his side. There's a heavy pause as they stare at each other in horror at her words. Suar tries to make sense of her words and tries to repeat what he understood. But catching up to what he was implying and realizing what her words sounded like, Cella's whole face bursts into a lovely shade of red. In the middle of the street with other towngoers looking at them oddly, Cella yells and tries to explain that that was not what her words meant. Suar saying that of course he knew that wasn't the case, and he just got confused for a moment, and Cella goes back to telling him to shut up. To distract the both of them, Cella starts running and pushing Suar in front of her. Apparently the guildmaster had ordered for them to head to the guild hall as soon as possible. In the guild, Regulus's expression is horribly serious. He asked for the both of them to come because something urgent came up. That morning, a messenger from the royal palace appeared. Suar and Cella are silent, unsure where the conversation was going but nonetheless expecting the worst. Apparently the night before, Finon's condition suddenly declined. Things have taken a turn and she might not be able to hold on for 20 more days. Regulus tells Suar and Cella that Finon only had 10 days left before it was too late. Suar and Cella's faces fall in despair. Cella finds her voice and yells that it was all just a lie, but Regulus plainly says that it was true. Desperately, Cella says that they still had Suar. Suar frowns. Cella continues to reason out that he was able to go from level 1 to C rank in just 10 days. She believed that if it was him, in 10 more days he could reach B rank, but then she's cut off when someone says it was impossible. Cella gets a dark look in her eyes as she turns to him. Suar's head is hung down, teeth clenched as he repeats that it was impossible. He says that at the rate they were going, there wasn't enough time. If he was still in a game and he could reset, he'd challenge a B rank dungeon right then and there, but losing meant death. He panics with what to do. Regulus sighs, resigned that since Suar had said so, then it must be true. With a pause, Regulus says that he heard Suar had been diving into dungeons non-stop. He advises Suar to get some rest, but with his words, Suar grits his teeth. Oh, I don't think he likes that idea. Hesitantly, he says that there was only one way. Cella turns to him, hoping for a chance. Suar turns to Cella and tells her that they needed 3 more people besides him and her, preferably B-rank veterans. Cella immediately says that she was joining in. Suar repeats his promise that he would follow her. His words make Cella blush, but Suar takes no notice of it, only saying that it would of course be dangerous, so he wasn't going to force her. Before he can say anything more, Cella determinedly says that she is joining. She even offers that she already had people in mind for allies, so Suar only had to leave it to her. She immediately runs out of Regulus's office even as Regulus tries to call her back. Regulus holds his face in his hand in exasperation with the way she acted, always charging straight ahead. Suar calls for Regulus's attention. He tells him that from then on he was going to say something that must never leave that room, so he asks him to swear absolute secrecy. The next day, Suar lies awake in bed for a few seconds before he slowly gets up. His body hurt. He slowly dressed up, still sleepy, but before he could head to the dungeons, he needed to stop by the guild. When he steps out of the building, Cella is waiting for him. They exchange greetings and walk together towards the guild. Cella comments that he looked pale as ever, before asking him if he was diving into dungeons without proper rest again. Suar plainly replies that they didn't have much time left. Cella pauses before she asks Suar why he was going so far to save Phenon. The question completely catches Suar off guard. Cella continues to ask if he maybe wanted something from the royal family in return. Suddenly she asks if Suar may have wanted Phenon as his bride. Suar exclaims at the bold accusation, asking what kind of sleazy motive she was expecting of him. Cella argues that it wasn't unreasonable to think since he was suddenly told to save a princess, and he just obediently accepted it. With an almost worried expression, Cella tells Suar that she didn't understand his feelings. She asks clearly what he was really thinking. Suar stares at her blankly. Suar thinks of his true feelings. With a pause, he finally says that there was nothing grand about why he was doing it, explaining that it was simply like a mountain in front of him he simply had to climb. Summoning back a joyful personality, he brushes the question off and tells Cella that they needed to get to the guild quickly, since the people Cella called for were already waiting for them. Suar's smile wobbles and he turns to lead them towards the guild. Internally, he berates himself for dodging the question. He'd always played games alone and barely even talked to other players. He never thought about it before why he kept playing games so much. He was just escaping from things he hated, and that was the only start. He just wanted to be the best at the games he loved, and that was all it ever was. Kind of relatable, not gonna lie. Finally, at the guild, 3 people gather at a table. A rather young-looking girl holding a staff greets them, reprimanding Cella for being 10 minutes late. Cella apologizes to the girl, who she calls Suzu. The male sitting at the table is surprised to see Suar, recognizing him as the guy who defeated Cella in the mock battle a few days back. Suar casually greets him. Finally, the last person in the table was a woman who asks Cella if Suar was the so-called hero, to which Cella confirms. Cella properly introduces each one of them to Suar. The man was Thunderclap's trail leader, Shin. Suzu was a priest class. And finally, the last woman was a warrior class named Rika. Rika asks what Suar and Cella wanted and why they were called in so early. Cella turns to Suar and he steps forward. Suar apologizes for calling them out so early, but before he can get another word out, he falls to the ground, flat on his face. Nice way to make an impression, I'd say. Shin asks him if he was alright. Suar struggles to get up, explaining that it was only sleep deprivation since he was in a dungeon a bit too long the previous night. He changes subjects to their main concern. He asks them if they would be able to keep what he was about to say a secret. Rika tells him to stop stalling and to just get to the point. Finally, Suar urges them to take a look as he summons his status window. All 3 lean closer to see. Rika stays quiet and Shin is unimpressed, but then Suzu tells him to look at the job section where Suar's martial swordsman job was written. Shin pauses for a moment, unable to recognize the class. Cella stares, dumbfounded, as Suar asks them again that from then on, they were to promise him that they won't tell anyone what he was going to say. From then on, he was going to teach them a way to become stronger. Time passes as Suar tells them about his knowledge and strategies. After he explains, Cella tries to summarize that Suar was telling them that if they all became martial swordsmen or some derivative class, they would be able to clear the B-rank dungeon. Suar shuts down her explanation, saying that that wasn't what he meant. Shin asks Suar how he planned on clearing a dungeon in 10 days. Picking up a pen, Suar explains that for the first step, all of the others needed to switch to a lower tier job and raise its level. All of them immediately exclaim at the idea. Cella asks if he wanted them to aim for another advanced job right then, but Suar calmly explains that after 7 days, they could return to their current advanced job. So as an example, in Cella's case, at the moment she was a swordmaster, the advanced job of a swordsman. Suar was asking her to switch to the lower job of archer, raise herself to level 30 before going back to her swordmaster status after 7 days. Suzu asks what the point of all of it was. Suar asks if they've ever felt a sudden surge of strength. Shin thinks it through and figures Suar was talking about a breakthrough. It was Suar's first time hearing the term in that world, but he continues that breakthroughs happen every 10 levels and raise one's power and magic. The increase is unique to the job, so if someone was to change jobs, it disappears. Rika then points out it was pointless, but Suar argues that the stat boosts at level 30 and level 60 remain even if someone was to switch jobs. Shin, Suzu, and Rika are stunned as Suar explains the stat bonus. By leveling lower jobs when they return to their advanced jobs, the boost they received would carry over. All four are dumbfounded at the new knowledge. Suar continues that if they all boost their stats that way, they would have an advantage when returning to their main jobs for the dungeon. Cella stays quiet as she thinks about all the time Suar had switched to lower jobs. She admits that she thought he'd lost his mind. She awkwardly thanks him for not abandoning her and sticking through everything. Reika finally asks what exactly Suar planned on making them switch jobs. Suar considers their skills and current jobs. To Shin, since he was a swordsmaster, Suar tells him to switch to fighter to boost his agility. Shin thinks about the idea and agrees that his agility was definitely a weak point. To Suzu, since she was a priest, she should switch to mage for intelligence. Suzu admits that she did feel like her magic capacity was lacking. For Raika, since she was a warrior, Suar suggests she switches to swordsman for strength. Raika tries to argue that her physical attack power wasn't low, but someone tells her to admit that it was. Suar turns to Cella to find her excitedly staring at him. She asks him what she should switch to, and Suar figures that since her sword swings were a bit rough, she should switch to archer for a raise in dexterity. His answer makes her lose her enthusiasm, but she accepts it all the same. There's a silence in the room as the rest try to gather their thoughts. Shin says that what Suar told them was pretty hard to believe, but Suzu says that there was no reason to doubt it either. Raika asks Suar how he knew all that information. Suar says that he couldn't tell them at the moment. Brushing the topic aside, he continues that, with their new knowledge, in 7 days, he needed the 4 of them to clear floors 1 to 5 of a B-rank dungeon. Cella immediately cuts in. She asks what would happen to the boss if they only went up to floor 5. Without defeating the boss, no one could get the elixir. Completely serious. Suar says that he would defeat the boss alone. The room explodes into chatter at his words as they're all unable to believe he could pull it off. Suar calmly tells them that he always fought solo and admits that it was easier for him to do it alone. Shin and Raika stay silent. Finally, Shin sighs in resignation. However, he asks that Suar answer something. Shin then says that maybe everything Suar had told them was true, but he still didn't understand what his goal was. He says that he found it weird that Suar was risking his life for a princess that he only met 10 days ago. Basically, Shin was telling him that he couldn't trust him. Suzu says that Shin was being harsh, but Shin doesn't take his words back. Calmly, Suar says that it was only natural to feel that way. Internally, he thinks of how Cella had asked the same thing. He wonders what would happen if he told them the truth. He wonders if they would reject him. Bro, they already think you're half crazy or something. They might throw you out if you say you transmigrated from another world. The silence stretches on and Cella starts to get worried with Suar's silence. Suddenly, he admits that it was only because he hated giving up. Cella is stunned. Suar doubles down and repeats that he just hated giving up. Shin is speechless as well, but Suar presses on that the idea of giving up on that world was unthinkable to the point that he'd rather die than run away. Even if he loses his life and everything else, he could never forgive himself if he gave up without seeking any way forward. The whole room is quiet. Suddenly realizing that he just spoke too honestly, my guy, you almost vaguely started trauma dumping, Suar suddenly starts to stumble over his words. He tries to explain that he's always been doing everything alone until then, but not this time around. Suar painfully tries to express himself. Bowing low, he asks to borrow the other's strength for his own sake. Cella stares quietly at Suar's bowed head, expression unreadable. I say that, but the girl looks like she's falling faster than Phenon's time is up. Is that too soon? Finally, Suzu curls up, barely able to hold in her laughter. Rika lightly reprimands her, but Suzu says to Suar that of all the things he could have said, he ended up going with that answer. Cella leans over and tells Suar that even if it was a lie, he could have just said that he was doing it out of a desperate wish to save the princess, and that still would have been a better excuse. At least he was honest about his feelings for once. Shin laughs, calling Suar a stubborn sore loser. Suar doesn't respond, his face flushed red. Cella pats his shoulder in an effort to comfort him. Shin says that either way, they were stuck. Even if it was a sinking ship, they would all still board it. Using the country's top party as Suar and Cella's backup, Shin says that if they failed, Suar was going to be held responsible for it. Suar's eyes are wide. He asks if they were going to help them. Shin says that he might have worded it badly, but they promise to cooperate with the hero. Smiling brightly, Suar and Cella thank them. Suar awkwardly tries to tell them that he wasn't the hero, however, but Shin just brushes his words off. Internally, Suar curses at himself. His whole life he had never shown himself to anyone or worked hard to gain someone's trust with words. He had always assumed they'd laugh at him or reject him, so he gave up. He'd shut his mouth at work and even in games, but now he was truly happy that someone's decision was swayed by him. Cella doesn't fail to notice his joy and immediately comes up to him. She accuses him of looking happier than when he reconciled with her. Suar tries to say that he wasn't. Suddenly, Regulus pops up from nowhere, much to the surprise of everyone in the room. Like seriously, he wasn't in any of the panels. Regulus calls for a strategy meeting. Time passes. Cella brings up that in the following day she and Thunderclap's Trail would start working on D-rank dungeons. She couldn't believe that she was going to be joining a party that once turned her down. Suar tells her to do her best since he was cheering her on. Cella side-eyes him, much to Suar's confusion. Cella turns to him and admits that she thought he would be joining them in the D-rank dungeon. Suar says that he would have loved to, but he needed to train in C-rank dungeons for leveling. Cella says that she would let it go for now, but jabbing a finger at Suar's chest, she reminds him that he promised to help her rise. She says that she would hold him to that promise until after they got the elixir. Nervously, Suar says that he understood. Before turning away, Cella says that in 7 days they would meet again. Suar watches her go quietly. Suar starts to think of how everyone had trusted him, someone who just showed up out of nowhere. Cella even believed that he could get the elixir. Suar had always fought for himself, but this time he wasn't in a game. Suar wanted to fight for the people who trusted him. Little by little, he had started to feel just that. After that, Thunderclap's Trail and Cella changed into lower-tier jobs. Holding different weapons, all 4 of them had nervous looks on their faces. They would have to work hard in 7 days to reach level 30 and gain their stat bonus. Regulus even arranged for them to enter a D-rank dungeon with their lower-tier jobs. Getting up from his seat, Suar stretches as he decides to get started on his own training. He would solo farm C rank. He had to raise his martial swordsman to level 30 and boost his strength and attack power. However, as he was leveling up, Suar rubs at his eyes with a groan. He was exhausted and sleepy. He already had a tight schedule before, but now it was even worse. He was so sleepy his leveling wasn't progressing at all. With a grim look, he was feeling drowsy, but he told himself he couldn't fall behind Cella and the others. Suddenly, a spear shoots at him at an incredible speed. Before it could strike him, Suar's eyes catch sight of it and he captures it in his hands. He spins it around in his hold. Although only muttering to himself, he tells his opponent to do their sneak attack more properly. He throws the spear back in its original direction. It hits the mermaid-like creature straight in the chest and it immediately disappears in a flurry of pixels. Suar frowns at how weak the creature was. He mourns that not being able to sleep or having to clear a dungeon without a save was rough. He wonders where the boss was. However, he also thinks that there is no way he should be fighting in his current conditions, bro. At the rate you're going, you're gonna die from sleep deprivation, not a monster. Days pass and at the entrance to the B-rank dungeon, Cella and her group arrive. She excitedly stares at the flight of stairs leading up to the gate. Her eyes sparkle as it's always been her dream to reach it. However, someone suddenly tells her to wait. It was Shin, looking at a completely worn-out Suar, just lying down on a single pillow on the ground. Shin asks Cella if the hero really was alright and Suar reassures him not to worry and that he was only resting his body a little, brother. You look like you're about to kick the bucket any time now. Cella says that his face looked really bad, Suzu backing her up by saying that it was clay-colored. Reika asks him if he even slept properly. With a wavering voice, Suar says that he's been leveling up in the dungeon non-stop. Changing the subject, he asks if the others had all managed to reach level 30. Cella excitedly replies that they did. They were half skeptical about the stat bonus, but once they had switched back to their main jobs and crushed enemies easily, they were all shocked. Suar realizes that it meant Cella also cleared a C rank. Cella happily replies that she's now all caught up with everyone else and even earned the right to enter B rank. Suar smiles at her, however Reika teases Cella that just a few days ago, she had caused a scene at the guild. Suddenly, Lisa comes rushing towards them. She excitedly gushes at the sight of Thunderclap's trail. She informs them that they were doing special admissions that day. Shin turns to Suar and asks him if he was seriously planning on lying down inside the dungeon. Suar was tightly holding onto his pillow. Suar asks if it was a bad idea to do so. Cella offers to keep watch until the 3rd floor. Shin couldn't believe that he really was planning on sleeping at the dungeon. Hey man, a guy's gotta do what a guy's gotta do to not die from lack of sleep. Lisa excitedly bids them farewell and to do their best, still flustered from her meeting. Suar's group stands in the teleportation circle. As they all prepare themselves to be ready, Cella wears a serious expression as she thanks everyone for working together for Princess Phenon. Shin breaks the tension by saying that it was too early for that, Suzu plainly stating that Cella should save it for after they got back. Reika teases her for being too nervous. Suar tells Cella to relax and do her best, which makes Cella turn a deep shade of red. Oh yeah, she's definitely falling hard. A burst of light overtakes them all as the teleportation circle turns on. When the light clears, all 5 of them find themselves standing in B-rank dungeon's 1st floor. Shin cracks his knuckles, saying that it's been a long time since they've been to a B-rank dungeon. He tells Suar to take it easy and sleep. Suzu and Reika excitedly say that they were itching to show Suar something different this time. The ground slowly opens, revealing monsters hidden under the grass. Shin and the rest of Thunderclap's trail rush in, weapons drawn. As promised, they would crush everything themselves all the way up to the 3rd floor. They lunge for the monsters. Spider-like creatures squeal as they run towards Thunderclap. Suzu leaps into the air, dodging an attack. Shin jumps, blades ready. Reika bursts into the enemy's shields with a penetrating defense pierce, and just as the enemies are left vulnerable, Shin comes in to deliver a killing blow, dealing a double slash, twin strike. Suzu raises her staff to control the explosion as Reika and Shin slide to a stop. All 3 pause, amazed. In the next second, they all start celebrating at their newfound strength. Shin raises his hand in a peace sign, proud that he had just taken the enemies out in one hit, but Reika and Suzu ignore him, exclaiming that that had never happened to them before. As they continue to celebrate to themselves and completely ignore him, Shin turns to Cella and Suar to hear some praise, to which the two give him plainly. Cella turns to Suar, telling him that he looked like he was doing fine so he could continue sleeping. Suar thanks Cella, saying that he would gladly take her up on that offer. He lies back down on the ground. He calculates that each floor takes an hour and a half to finish, so 3 floors would give him around 5 hours of sleep. As he closes his eyes, he thinks how lack of sleep was painful. But so far things were going well, so for now, he was going to rest. Before he knew it, he was slowly gaining consciousness again. Someone was repeatedly calling out to him. When he opens his eyes, Suar immediately sees Cella. She tells him to wake up since they were transferring to the 4th floor. Suar sits up in a flash, surprised they were so quick, but Cella tells him that he just slept so well. Suar asks if everyone was alright in a panic, to which Cella responds positively. Suar sighs in relief. Reika says that she got injured a bit at some point, but Suzu had healed her. Suzu excitedly says that thanks to her bigger mana pool, she could heal easier too. Suddenly, the Thunderclap members crowd around Suar. They tell him in a rush that experiencing everything firsthand truly drove their new skills home. They couldn't believe that he knew something like that, and asked him who he really was. Finally, they ask if he was sure that he really wasn't the hero. Suar is uncomfortable at the sudden pressure. Cella, meanwhile, looks smug in the background. But that only lasts for a split second before she tells the Thunderclap members that it didn't matter who Suar was at that moment, and they should focus on pushing forward. She tells them to hurry up and move on. Shin laughs and teases Suar that he's earned Cella's trust. Suar isn't quite convinced. Suzu completely agrees with Shin. Reika explains that although Cella didn't know anything about him or asked him anything, she still trusted Suar, which was something not anyone could just do. Suar goes quiet as he thinks about their words. He agrees that Reika was right. Having Cella as an ally truly made him grateful. Cella suddenly turns around. She holds a hand out to him and urges them to move forward. Suar reaches out his hand with a smile. Cella takes his hand and helps him up. Suar thinks how he wanted to trust her too. He decides that after the battle, he wanted to tell her about himself and the world he came from. This could just be me, but that sounds like an awful idea on all fronts. The wind picks up again as everyone holds each other's hands and proceeds to teleport to a new floor. Before they knew it, they were standing on the grounds of B-rank dungeon's 4th floor. Cella says that since Suar just woke up, he should do some stretches or something because she was joining into the fight too. Suddenly, she notices Shin and Suzu sharing some odd looks and she asks what's wrong. Shin admits that starting from that floor, it was uncharted territory even for them, so staying alert was natural. Suddenly, Cella looks up as a large shadow casts over them. A giant, almost humanoid creature appears before them. It was a large orc. Shin orders for him and Reika to be on the front lines while Suzu and Cella were on support. Everyone readies for battle. The orc pulls back its arm as it prepares to attack. With a powerful swing, the orc smashes the ground where the team had just been standing. Everyone springs out to dodge. Shin starts to panic, telling the team that the wooden club it carried was deadly, and with one hit, it could all be over for them, so they needed to be careful. Cella's eyes are determined as she rushes in. She leaps into the air and is able to deal a slash that distracts the orc long enough for Suzu to support her. Suzu deals out a spell before moving away so Shin can parry an attack. Reika joins the fight and all of them rush the orc all together. Suar watches, amazed as Cella joins the team's movements. Thunderclap's trail members were amazing too. Even with a temporary member, their coordination doesn't falter. They needed to have serious training to move like that. Cella twists in the air with a grin. Watching them, Suar was sure they would be able to do it. Cella was syncing with Thunderclap's movements perfectly. Cella deals another blow, but just then, the orc swings its club at her. Cella flinches at its closeness, but before it can hit her, she sees it move and tilts her head up in time. She could see the enemy's movements. She dodges and parries perfectly. However, as she kept on fighting, someone yelled for her to not push too far. Cella ignores their warning and continues pushing. Damn it all, Cella, come on now! The members panic at her rash actions as she lunges for the orc. She manages to get behind it and she takes a jab at it. However, as she does so, her sword sinks and it gets caught in the orc's thick skin. Cella's mind goes blank and she tries to pull her sword free. This isn't going to end well, is it? Suzu panics at the realization that she was stuck. She yells for Cella to drop her sword. Shin rushes in to try and help, but Cella doesn't let go. Cella's eyes go wide and her vision goes white as she takes a direct hit with the orc's club. She goes flying. Her body tumbles through the ground roughly. Thunderclap's members and Suar stare in horror at Cella as she fails to get up from the floor. Suar screams for Cella's name as she lay in a pool of her blood. That is the end of the recap at Chapter 7. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.